Good morning, nerds. Today's installment, this is episode 7 of the first-person shooter tutorial. In today's installment, we are going to be creating the enemy spawner. And our goal here is to set it up so that we can create new enemies on the fly, on an interval, and so we have more things attacking us than just the one. With the logic that you have a lot of different options with this spawner, you could either just have one and all of the enemies are kind of dumping out of it at a relatively quick rate, or you could create several different spawners in some different locations, and my goal is I have to hunt them all down across the map and figure out what's going on and try to eliminate every single spawner. So we've got a couple of different options here. They're all kind of good, but this is going to give us an opportunity to try a few different things. So as usual for this kind of an operation, since I do want that spawner to be an attackable object, we do need to create one. And we've got a few different options. I could just start copying the enemy prefab because they are going to have a lot in common, but just to keep getting us some practice making prefabs and keeping things moving, I'm just going to go ahead and work from scratch. I also kind of like doing it anyways. It's kind of a fun thing. I really do enjoy making prefabs. I don't know if that means that there's something wrong with me or what, but I do kind of like it. So we're going to go ahead and create a new prefab. As usual, we're going to create an empty shell around everything. So we're going to start out with the create empty. As always, I'm going to zero it out. So here we go. And that's going to leave my positions and rotations at 0. My scale is going to be 1. And I'm going to name this thing enemy spawner. We're going to call this enemy spawner. And I'm immediately just going to drag it down into prefabs where we're going to do the rest of our work. So I'm not going to worry too much about making it pretty in my inspector now. And in fact, I'm actually just going to, I'll leave the one in the inspector, or in the hierarchy, I mean. So we'll just go ahead and leave that guy alone. We're going to go ahead and open up the prefab. This is going to take us into, as always, the Prefab Builder. This time, normally I like doing capsules, but I also want to think about shape language. In this case, the spawner, we could do a lot of different things. I could do like a sideways cylinder and make it look more portal-ish. I could do a cube or something floating in space. There's a make it kind of start looking like the Tesseract from Avengers or something. But for this one, I think we're just going to play it simple, and I'm just going to do a sphere. So I'm going to do a red sphere. So it kind of matches the shape language of the enemies, but it's a little different than the enemies. Alternatively, I could do a cylinder, and that would kind of still match the shape language. And I'm going to color it just like the enemy. So at least they'll kind of have that visual look of going together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm really not going to worry about things too much. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new sphere. And that's going to be centered. And I'm just going to take that sphere, kind of zoom in a little bit. We're going to just lift it up off the ground a bit. And what I'm doing here is I actually do want it a little above the ground because I want it to look like a floating orb. That feels more menacing to me than just doing a normal, like just having it sitting on the ground or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and go to my materials. I'm going to grab that enemy material and just throw it on there. That way it has the same coloring as the enemies do. And this is really starting to come together pretty quickly. The other thing I need to do, like I've done with some of my other objects, is I really do want that collider in a different spot. And just to make sure that I don't have any issues with the guns and being able to misfire and shooting in different spaces, and I can make sure that I can hit it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete the sphere collider. So we're going to go ahead and just remove that component. I'm going to go into my enemy spawner. I'm going to add a new collider, but I'm going to add a capsule collider. So I'm going to go ahead and add a capsule collider, and usually we've done 0.5 radius and 2 height with a Y offset on the capsule, not on the object, of 1. And you're going to notice, like most of our other objects, that kind of makes it kiss the ground, and it's still encompassing the entirety of that sphere. It's also going a little bit above, and that's going to allow me, I really could pull this down a little bit, but that's going to make sure that no matter what height that gun fires off at, that I'm still able to hit the capsule. It is going to create a few weird looks if things go weird. I could always reduce the height and then reduce the center accordingly. But I think that having this object be about the size of a player is really going to be beneficial in the long run, even if visually it doesn't look that way. So we're going to go ahead and work with that. That feels pretty good to me. And then I'm also going to add a rigid body. So add component, rigid body. Again, I'm going to turn off gravity, and actually this thing, it's a sphere. We're not even going to notice if it turns. And since it's going to be a stationary object, I'm literally just going to freeze all of its positions, rotations, everything. That thing is not moving. And that's going to be good for us. Okay. So, I think we're in pretty good shape. Like that's about it. We're also going to tag this thing. Surprisingly, we're going to tag this as an enemy. And I know that there is some logic in making it an enemy spawner tag, but in reality, what's going to end up happening here is that we want to be able to check later and see if there's any enemies on the board. And we could say, is there any enemies or spawners on the board? But this just feels like a little bit smoother method. So we're just going to tag it as enemy. When all the enemies are dead, we'll be able to win. That's going to be maybe our next installment, maybe the one after. But this is going to help us out later. And for the most part, this is about it. There's not a whole lot to this object. The last thing I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and back out of this. I'm going to go to my enemy prefab, and I'm going to kind of dig in a little bit and grab this HP bar. So I've got my HP max bar and my HP current bar. I'm just going to grab both of those. I'm going to Control C to copy those. And then I'm going to go back into my prefab here. And I could have really stolen them off the player or off the enemy, but the enemies are right above him. And I like that a little bit better. So I stole it off of the enemy prefab. I stole their max and HP current bars. I'm going to go back into my enemy spawner prefab. And I'm going to just go ahead and paste those in. And that's going to give me an HP bar. It is wildly offset. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that X position and the Z position with zeros. And that bar is a little high, so I'm going to adjust that part manually. So we're just going to nudge this down just a little bit here. And I'm not really thrilled with what it's done to my scale. Something didn't survive the copy. So I'm going to go change those to, that should round up to 0.1 and 0.1. And then I'm going to double check and see what happened to my HP current bar. My HP current bar looks pretty good. So we can kind of leave that alone. And then just to make sure everything looks right, I'm also going to just quickly test on the HP current bar. I'm just going to reduce the scale to like 0.8 just to make sure that still looks like it's subtracting correctly. That looks pretty good. So I'm not too worried about it. We just want to make sure everything, when we copy paste like that was kind of an aggressive copy paste. I'm just like, take the object and slam it in there. We really do want to make sure that everything landed correctly. The last thing I want to do in validations, I'm pretty sure this looks good, but I just want to double check, is I'm double checking that Z-axis and making sure that it is the same Z-axis that the regular sphere has. It is. This probably doesn't really matter, but I'm always touchy about stuff like that. So I just want to make sure that they're both kind of facing the same direction. And that feels pretty good. I will note that if we click on the enemy spawner, we can see the HP bar is technically inside of our collider, but it's not going to matter, so it doesn't make a difference here. Although one thing I should have done, and I'm just now thinking about this, is I do still have box colliders on my HP bar, and that's going to create some weird behavior. That could also potentially create some weird behavior with my player. So I think I'm going to eliminate the box colliders on both the HP max bar and the HP current bar. And then while I'm thinking about this, because I'm not really feeling good about it being on those other objects, I'm going to go ahead and back out of my enemy spawner, which I feel like is done for now. There's one more thing we need to do, but I'm also going to just go into my enemy prefab, and I'm going to remove the colliders on those as well. So I'm removing the box colliders on my enemy's HP bar and the current HP bar. I'm surprised I forgot this last time. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on my player prefab. I'm going to remove my box there, and I'm going to remove my box collider there. So I've only removed, just for the record, I've only removed them off of the actual cubes. I haven't, and I'm double checking my gun now. I did not remove the collider on the player because without that, everything falls apart. So please make sure you leave the capsule collider alone. I only removed the box colliders on the various HP bars across all 3 of my objects that have them. And since the players did get some override, I want to make sure that the player's box collider is still removed. So I'm going to go in there, and I'm just kind of looking at that. It is gone, so that's fantastic. We're good to go there. We don't need to do anything else. All right, so I got an enemy spawner. It's in front of me. That is a little closer than I think I wanted, even for testing purposes. It's really close. So I'm going to grab that collider, and I'm just going to grab its Z and just kind of punt it back a little bit. If your map looks different than mine, you can just put it anywhere. Our goal here is I want it somewhere where I can see, but I don't really want it like super close to me. So this feels pretty good. So I think we're in good shape. Next thing that we're going to do is, does that orbit look good? Is its height off the ground pretty good? Is it visible, etc.? I think that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with them. So we'll go ahead and leave that alone. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is get some code down for this. Now, here's the nice thing is almost all the code that we need for the enemy spawner is already done. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna like steal a lot of code from the enemy. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back into my enemy spawner prefab. I'm gonna add component. I'm gonna add a new code, which is gonna be enemy spawner script, capital E, capital S, capital S. We're going to go ahead, create an add as always, and as soon as this thing attaches itself, we'll go ahead and go into it. Okay, so I'm going to double click on that script. I did forget to load Visual Studio this time, so this will take just a second. Hopefully not too long. And here we go. Now, this script is really pretty good. But again, a lot of what we're going to do here, we can steal from the enemy. So I'm going to go to my enemy script, and honestly, I'm just going to copy the whole darn thing. Really, all I'm going to do here is, I don't need Unity Engine AI, and that's the only one I've added up here, and I don't want to bring in enemy script because that's going to be a little weird. So really, I'm going to start here at line 8, which is after that first curly brace. And I'm going to go all the way down to 106, which your line numbers might not match up with mine, but the key is that I'm getting everything except that very, very last curly brace. That last one is part of the class. I do want to include up through take damage, but I don't want to get that last curly brace because this is the class one, and that's going to give me some curly brace issues if I copy it. So we're going to copy that. I'm going to go into enemy spawner script. I'm going to get rid of the 2 functions that are already in there because our clone will have that stuff in it. Give myself a little bit of room, and we're going to paste all of this, and then we're going to see how we did. So most of this is copyable. Really, it's just a matter of deletion and slight tweaks. So there's not going to be a whole lot of stuff that needs to change here. So let's go through, we're just going to kind of quickly go through everything that we need to edit on this. And again, it's mostly going to be deletes. There's a couple tiny edits, and then we're probably going to be done with this. This is a pretty quick one. So the first one is we've got HP max and HP. The enemy spawner, if we're going to be able to gun it down, it does indeed need hit points. So we will go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and leave those alone. The gun damage, I'm not going to let my enemy spawner fire back at me. It's not going to have any defenses. The enemies are the defense. So we're just going to have it be a target only. And since it's not going to shoot back at me, it does not need gun damage. It does not need bullet speed. It does need firing delay. And we're going to explain that in just a second, but we're going to leave firing delay alone. But it does not need bullet speed or bullet damage. It does not need a rotation angle. It does not need a speed. It does not need a stopping distance. Because it is not going to be using the nav mesh or any ray casting or anything crazy like that, it does not need to know the player. It does not need a nav mesh agent. It does need to know its HP bar because it will take damage and we'll need to be able to visualize that. It does not need a bullet spawner. We're just going to let enemies spawn off the center of it. And it doesn't need a bullet, but it does need an enemy. So I'm going to take that last game object, the game object bullet that was left over from the enemy code, and I'm just going to rename that enemy because that makes me feel better. Technically, I could make this all work by keeping it as bullet. It would actually be less work, but it would add less clarity. And we should always endeavor to make our code legible and readable to somebody else. And so if we need to edit a couple of variables to do that, I think that's a good thing. Okay, and that's it for our variables area. So we have really, really reduced things. And we do need to pick a firing delay that's going to feel good. Right now, I'm spawning 3 enemies per second because the delay is 1/3 of a second. I don't know how I feel about that. That's probably a little too quick. That is definitely faster than I can shoot enemies down. So there is going to be a little bit of a Zerg rush feel to this that you're going to be on the wrong side of. But this is also going to be really good for testing. When I'm done, I'm probably going to lower this to like 3, which I realize is an increase in the delay, but I'm thinking lowering the rate of spawn to about 3. So that way a new one spawns every 3 seconds or so. That gives you kind of a chance to deal with them a little bit. But you know, everybody's sweet spot is going to be in a different space, and we don't really have our guns yet. So it's really tough to balance this game until we have everything completed. So our next trick, but this is going to control how fast we spawn enemies, and that's why I wanted to leave that firing delay alone. So if we go into start, we can start kind of chopping away at that too. We do need to set our HP equals HP max. And you know, you can also define these orbs, like how do you want them to react in your game? Do you want them to be massive hit point soaks that we have to spend some time consciously deleting or destroying, in which case you might want to set a value of 1,000 or maybe even 10,000 hit points? Or do you want to make them like a normal enemy as they are now with 100 hit points? Or do you want to make them super fragile and like any stray shot's going to kill them, in which case maybe you only want a 1 in there. So you guys can kind of pick that out as you go. I'm going to leave 100 just because for this purpose, I don't really care. And I do actually for now, because I want to be able to test that HP bar, I want to make sure that it takes a few hits to kill. And not too many because that'll just be annoying. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to leave it at 100, which for me right now, I think my bullets are set to 20. So that should be about 5 hits to kill. If I can even get a shot in with those high speed enemy spawnings, but this will work out. Okay, so HP equals HP max, we definitely need to keep. We are not using a nav mesh agent with this object, so we can delete both or all 3 references to nav. And we actually don't, because the only purpose of the player being located by the enemy was to make the nav mesh work, we actually don't need that either, which is good because we deleted that game object reference anyways. So we're going to delete all of that and leave very, very little in our start function. In update, moving on to update now, we don't need to deal with firing delay left. We're not going to worry about navigating towards the player, and honestly, this is one where I would consider leaving the player in the code just for this purpose, because otherwise the enemy is going to continue spawning after a player dies. I'm not going to worry about that too much, so we're just going to get rid of that chunk, and we're going to get rid of its corresponding curly brace down below. So that's this guy here. And I just remembered, as I'm looking at the code now, we also had included this else. We would go looking for it. Again, we don't even have that variable anymore, so we're going to get rid of that entire condition, and that's going to clean up the rest of our code down there. Looking at remaining code, nav.set destination, player transform position. Again, we're not using nav mesh. We can just get rid of that. We do still need to check the firing delay, so we're going to leave that one alone. Although I can change this from bullet timer, I'm going to change that to enemy timer just so it's clear that we left that on purpose. We no longer need to do ray casting. We're not going to have it spawn when we see something. We're just going to have it spawn all the time. So we can get rid of that ray cast issue. which is also going to mean that we don't have a hit to even check against the player. We don't care about that anyways. We're just going to indiscriminately spawn. And I want to point out here that there is 2 curly braces in this chunk that we're about to delete. So I'm going to delete that chunk, and I'm going to delete the 2 corresponding curly braces to that chunk. All right, in here, we do want to quote unquote fire a bullet. I'm going to do the backspace and pull the code in, or put the curly brace back in. Trick to recenter this, and all I did there is delete the curly brace and put it back. And that just does a realignment of that material. And let's pick this one apart. So what we're going to do here is we are going to instead, again, I like to make this more legible, so I'm going to call this game object E for enemy, is going to be instantiate. We left our game object called enemy. And since we're spawning off of our torso, I'm just going to do transform.position because it's our transform and our position. And that is going to cause us a slight problem because if our collider interacts with their collider, it's going to have some problems, but we're going to fix that in a couple of minutes. So right now, if we run, aside from all these red lines, we are going to have some problems, but we're going to deal with those. So I don't really care. That's okay. Okay, and we are going to leave quaternion identity alone. That'll spawn the enemy in his normal existing orientation, and that's good. Okay, B comment bullet script. That we don't need. All the parameters that the enemy needs are actually set on the enemy prefab itself. There is no reason to be doing this at all, so I can just get rid of that entire line. And the last thing left is the firing delay left minus equals firing delay. That's going to allow us to restart the timer before the next enemy, just like we did with the guns. That's a smart thing to leave, so we're just going to leave that alone. And then this is allowing us, again, this is copied enemy code to rotate if we get hit, or to rotate if the enemy is, or excuse me, if the player is too close. Enemy doesn't rotate, or enemy spawner doesn't rotate, so we don't need that at all. And again, I'm getting the if, the curly brace, everything in the curly braces, and then that closing curly brace, but not the one that's closing the update function. So we can go ahead and get rid of all that. And our update function is much, much smaller. And really, we only typed a few short things. I changed the E here, and I changed the enemy there. And that's the only things I really edited. Oh, and instead of fire a bullet, I'm going to say spawn an enemy. Again, I just want to make sure that my my notes are good. I want to make sure that, you know, the next programmer that looks at this is going to be like, oh, that makes sense, and not, what was he doing? I can't even figure. I don't know what this. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, so we don't want that. So this is going to be good for us. Okay, moving forward, on collision, if we collide with a bullet, we should take some damage. Yeah, that makes some sense. Let's just go ahead and leave that alone. Same deal here. We subtract some damage when we get hit. We generate some math to figure out what the float of our damage is, apply that to our X transform scale. That all makes some sense. So we're going to just leave that alone. HP, if the HP is less than 0, we're going to go ahead and destroy. That still makes some sense. And if we overheal, technically we don't need this. It is doing the extra check. I want to try to be efficient. There is no way the enemy can actually heal, or the enemy spawner can heal. So we're just going to go ahead and delete that. So we're just going to delete that part of it. And that's pretty good. That's really it. The enemy spawner should be basically working now, at least on a code level. We do need to make some quick edits inside Unity, but this is really pretty good. So we're going to bump back into Unity. We're going to wait for the scripts to compile, and we are going to go back into the enemy spawner, and we're going to make 2 quick changes here. So all of our numbers did seem to come through. We do have that 1/3 of a second for the firing delay. We've got hit points 100. HP will get set as we go, and firing delay left should start at 0. So these all make some sense. What we need to do is we do need to fix the HP bar, and we need to fix which enemy is being spawned. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do that with the object that we already had in the inspector, but I do want to point out that if this works out, we do need to still set it up on the prefab because we want the prefab to have the same stuff. Just like we did with the enemy and also with the player, I'm going to grab my current HP bar. I'm going to drag that into the HP bar object and make sure we are grabbing the inside bar, not the outside bar. So it's this guy here. And we also want to know what kind of an enemy we're going to spawn. Now, this one is a little tricky, and I want you guys to pay attention to this. A lot of times what someone will do here is they'll drag the enemy out of the inspector and drop it in here. Now, this works out fine until if that original enemy is ever destroyed, the spawner doesn't have anything to point to, and the spawner will basically sit there and say, oh, you don't have an instantiated object, that's bad, what are you doing, are you stupid, and keep on freaking out about it. So we don't ever want to use that one because that one could possibly die and then we wouldn't have an object. So the better practice to do is don't ever do what I just did. Don't pull a spawnable object out of the inspector. If you're trying to spawn things, you always drag it out of the prefab. So I'm going to grab the enemy out of prefabs and I'm going to drop that in my spawner. Okay, now the last thing that we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and run this right now, and I know that there's going to be one little problem at least, is that the enemies are going to come out. Actually, those guys are doing pretty good. I'm actually happier than I thought I would be out of this, and they are killing me really fast. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to temporarily make myself impossible to kill. I'm going to go to the player script, and I'm just going to comment out my ability to take damage. It's kind of cheating, and by kind of, I mean a lot, but what we're able to do now is we're just going to be temporarily invincible, and that's going to allow me to look at this spawner, which has seemed to be disappearing. I don't actually see where the spawner is anymore. I'm seeing some enemies spawning over this way maybe. I'm really trying to find where did the enemies go. I don't see them. Those might still be the enemies left over from the previous couple videos. So I'm not actually seeing my enemy spawner. I want to check that out, and somehow I clipped through a wall as well. So what I'm going to do here, oh, the enemies might have actually gunned it down. So we do need to kind of do some reality checking and some fixing here. But basically, so I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and then I'm immediately going to jump into the scene view because I want to see what happened to that enemy spawner. So if I zoom in here, that enemy spawner is really going to town. He's creating objects every 1/3 of a second or so, like he's supposed to. But I don't see how he died before, so that's a little bit concerning. The other thing is the enemies are coming out and they're getting a little wobbly with the physics, and they're kind of jumbled. And just to make sure that there's no physics-related problems, although they do seem to be doing sort of okay, what I do want to do is prevent them from colliding with each other or anything else, because that does throw off their momentum and the rigid bodies can get a little weird. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the bullets a couple tutorials ago. I'm going to go up to my edit and then my project settings. We're going to go take a look at physics real fast. We do need to create an extra layer, so I'm going to do that first. I forgot that step, I'm sorry. We're going to go to the layers menu here and we're going to say add layer. And up here in the top, so we've got bullets already. That was from a couple tutorials ago. And I'm going to add an enemy layer. And when I go back into my, whoops, not my navigation. Now if I click on an object, I'm going to go to my my enemy spawner, and I'm going to do this. Yeah, let's just do it here. We're going to go to my enemy spawner. I'm going to change that to enemy, which is now 7. It's asking me what about my child objects. It doesn't really matter, kind of like with bullets. It doesn't really matter, but we're going to go ahead and change them anyways, just to be on the safe side. And then I'm also going to do the same thing to my enemy prefab. I'm going to click down here on the prefab version of the enemy, and I'm going to do the same. I'm going to switch those to the enemy layer. Yes, I'm going to change children. And then I'm going to click back here, and now this chart over here in physics, which again I got to by going edit, project settings, That's going to bring up this screen here, and then click on the physics button here on the left in the menu. And what we're going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom where enemy and enemy intersect. I'm going to uncheck that box, and now those objects will not be aligned with each other in physics. I'm going to go ahead and close that window. You don't need to do a save, which is both good and bad, I guess. And that's going to kind of fix any weird collision bugs that may have caused. So far, I think we're okay. But and my enemy spawner does appear to have deleted itself again. I'm not sure exactly why it keeps doing that. I think it's probably taking friendly fire from the enemies, but I'm not really positive on that. I do kind of want to track that though. So I'm going to leave it on scene view here, and I'm really just, I'm going to flip back to scene view. I really do want to see what's going on. Why does that enemy spawner keep on getting killed when I get close to it? So what I'm going to do here is to be able to test this a little bit easier, I'm going to take my game view, I'm going to unattach it, I'm going to just kind of stick it over here, and then I can kind of watch the scene view, so I can kind of watch the bubble down there as I'm playing the game in this window. And so I can kind of see, why is that enemy spawner, it looks like it probably is taking some friendly fire. So like it's still there, but when I come over this way, I've probably managed to get it with friendly fire. I don't see more enemies spawning, and they do seem to be kind of killing themselves. So that kind of worked out for me as a player, although had I not been invincible, I probably would have taken way more damage than I could have survived. But getting the players or the enemies to kill themselves is always kind of satisfying. I haven't fired a single bullet yet, and I'm only down to 4 enemies. So that was kind of fun. But it looks like the enemy spawner is working correctly. That was a nice test. The enemy spawner does appear to be working correctly. I just needed to validate that. So that's fine. We're going to go ahead and stop that. Now, we've made quite a few changes to the spawner in the prefab here. And I want to be really careful because we have not in the prefab, we've made a lot of changes to the enemy spawner in the hierarchy. We haven't made those changes to the prefab. Now, I could go through and make those changes manually, but the easier way to do this, since I've been behaving myself in terms of what I've been adding, is to go up to this overrides menu and look at what's changed. Well, I did add an enemy spawner script. I added a sphere. I've added an HP max bar and an HP counter. I'm going to go ahead and apply all those changes. And then I'm going to look at my enemy spawner in the prefab and just kind of look and see if it looks right. I do have my enemy and my HP current bar there. I'm kind of clicking on that. It looks like it's attached correctly. My bars do look right. Everything kind of looks good. So I think this has been a good save. And again, anytime you're playing with an object in the hierarchy that is part of a prefab, you can always go up to overrides and click on that apply all. The other thing is if you don't want to keep changes that you've made, you can also do revert all, which is handy. But this time we definitely didn't want to revert. We wanted to keep those changes. And while I'm at it, I'm going to grab enemy and look and see. It looks like there is no overrides in enemy, so I haven't really made any changes there that I would have to worry about. So that's worth kind of checking out. My player, though, as long as I'm doing this, my last tutorial, we did kind of move around the HP max bar, and we did move the camera, and we made a couple player script edits. As long as I'm thinking about this, I'd like to kind of change some or apply some of those. So I don't want to apply all because that will take the camera with me, and that's really not a good thing. So I'm going to grab my player change. It looks like it was just, adding the camera to the inspector. Honestly, that change we don't want to replicate, so we're going to leave that one alone. No overrides there, no overrides there. There's a transform override. Oh, that was us moving the HP bar. We're going to go ahead and apply that. It's okay if we don't. That's the thing that makes the HP bar basically look like a backpack on him. And then everything else is camera related, and we do kind of want to leave those things alone. So you generally don't want to apply camera changes. And that's making it look good. I think that's about it for this tutorial. This one was a little bit shorter than some of the previous ones have been, but that's getting us everywhere where we need to be, and that's fantastic. So this has been it for the enemy spawner. I not 100% sure what we're going to do next time. I think next time what we'll probably work on is the health pickup, just because that's kind of a fun one. But that's it for this one. So I hope you liked what you saw today. As always, if this worked out for you, and like and subscribe and maybe even tell a friend. Other than that, we're going to be done for the day. And as always, in closing, keep on creating. Have a great day, nerds.